All right, y'all, welcome to the show. Your boy is back from vacation. I'm feeling good. I laid on the beach for a bunch of days, played some mini golf, ate a bunch of ice creams, a funnel cake or two. But I've been excited to get back on air. Certainly recharge my batteries, and I'm ready to dive into the deep end. So, bunch of stuff we're talking about today. I'm playing catch up. A lot of this stuff is super important. So I'm going to give you an update on student loan debt relief. Believe it or not, it is not dead. I repeat, it is not dead. And Joe Biden just took a step that many people on the left were begging him to take. So I'm going to give you all the details of it and break it down for you because it's not as straightforward as it might appear. There's still some questions that are up in the air. We're going to address all of them. I'm also going to give you the Supreme Court case that came out maybe 5 days or so ago on LGBTQ rights. I'll give you that decision. There is a giant scandal around that case for good reason because it appears to be totally made up. The facts of the case appear to be completely and utterly made up. So I'll tell you what they ruled. We'll also get into a Ron DeSantis ad that went viral because apparently he has 4chan Nazis running his campaign. That is not hyperbolic. It actually appears to be Occam's razor when you look at the content of this ad going after Trump. It's really something. So we'll talk about that as well. And then later on in the show, Elon Musk casually talks about restricting voting rights from certain groups of people. And Lindsey Graham gets booed to the high heavens at a Trump rally. And it is a glorious thing to see. So we're going to get into all that and much, much more. So let's start here. And you guys know the deal, shameless plugs. Everybody click like, click subscribe, all the fun stuff. Support the show on Patreon, link below, yada, yada. Okay. So the Supreme Court the other day, we learned, struck down Joe Biden's student loan debt relief. And this is something that, we thought for a while was likely to happen based on the makeup, the ideological makeup of the Supreme Court. There's just way more conservative justices. But there was a question mark there for a minute because a news story came out that basically the details of one of the cases on student loan debt reduction, it was imploding. The details were sort of bogus. So there's this thing called Moella. Moella is this student loan debt processor in, I believe it's Missouri. And there were emails that came out from internally in Moella where people who work there were like, we don't have standing. We don't agree with this. This case should be thrown out. And what happened was the Attorney General of Missouri basically did the case on Moella's behalf, which is very bizarre. Again, it's an overreach by conservative Republican officials who are just trying desperately by any means necessary to take down the student loan debt relief. Now, turns out ultimately the Supreme Court didn't care about the particulars because they ended up slapping down the student loan debt relief anyway. Now, my commentary for a very long time now has been, Joe Biden, even if they do this, you still have a path to student loan debt relief. It's called the Higher Education Act of 1965, and it's very clear in its wording that you can still reduce or eliminate student loan debt, at the very least, all the student loan debt that the federal government holds. It just so happens to be the case the federal government holds about 90% of student loan debt, so they can do whatever they want with that debt. And a more straightforward reading of the law is that the Higher Education Act would allow him to do this over the justification that he used. So what justification did he use? He used something called the HEROES Act. And the HEROES Act was a law that was passed in 2003 in the wake of 9/11 and the war on terror. But the wording of it was used to apply it during the COVID pandemic. Basically, in a national emergency, you can, modify or waive loans. And so they use that justification. Now, a lot of people are like, well, why did they use that justification? I think the answer is kind of simple. I think it's because under the Trump administration, they had used that law as well to reduce some student loan debt for some people. So they thought, hey, if that already worked, let's try the thing that already worked, as opposed to invoking the Higher Education Act. But of course, the Supreme Court is made up of complete and utter partisan hacks. So they said, when Trump did it, it was okay. But now that you're trying to do it in a broader way, it's not okay. So anyway, after the case, we learned they struck down student loan debt relief. Well, what did Joe Biden do? It was either the same day or the day after. I think it was actually the same day. Joe Biden comes out and says the following.
I'm announcing today a new path consistent with today's ruling to provide student debt relief to as many borrowers as possible, as quickly as possible. We will ground this new approach in a different law than my original plan, the so-called Higher Education Act.
So he's actually doing the thing that I was begging him to do. It wasn't just me, to be clear. I don't want to do like ridiculous self-aggrandizement here. But you had like Bernie Sanders was telling him to do the same thing. There were other Democratic politicians who were telling him to do the same thing. It was certainly a chorus from Democratic activists on the ground who were screaming, "Do it this way." Guys, it looks like he listened. Now, again, I'm going to get to the twists and the turns in a second. It's not as straightforward as it appears, but so far, at face value, this is kind of based.
The so-called Higher Education Act. That will allow Secretary Cardona, who's with me today, to compromise, waive, or release loans under certain circumstances. This new path is legally sound. It's going to take longer, but in my view, it's the best path that remains to providing for as many borrowers as possible with debt relief.
So if you notice there, he said, quote, "It's going to take longer." So that's where everybody, including me, full disclosure, we start getting a little bit like, well, hold on now. Wait, why would that take longer? The justification is even more clear based on the plain text of the law. So why the hell would it take longer? Well, look, we have one answer to that question. This is from Business Insider. They did an article on it. Why Biden's new plan to cancel student debt is going to take a lot longer than his first proposal. So here's what they say. President Joe Biden isn't letting Friday's Supreme Court decision stop him from trying to get student debt relief to millions of borrowers, but it could take some time. On Friday, the High Court struck down Biden's first plan to cancel up to $20,000 in student debt for federal borrowers using the HEROES Act of 2003. That act allows the Secretary of Education to waive or modify student loan balances in connection with a national emergency like COVID-19. But the Supreme Court majority ruled Biden's usage of that act was an overreach of authority and cannot be implemented. By the way, just to be clear, I disagree with them even on that. Like, I think this case, they should have said, it's good enough, right? National emergency, people were struggling financially, we're going to reduce student loans, end of conversation. So this is an activist court in a right-wing direction. Okay. They continue. However, just hours after the Supreme Court handed down that decision, Biden and Education Secretary Miguel Cardona announced they'll be trying again using the Higher Education Act of 1965. Quote, "That will allow Secretary Cardona, who is with me today, to compromise, waive, or release loans under certain circumstances," Biden said Friday. You just saw that. "This new path is legally sound. It's going to take longer, but in my view, blah, 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 blah. The reason the process will take longer is because the Higher Education Act must go through the negotiated rulemaking process, in which it could take months at minimum to hold public hearings on the law and solicit public comment." Quote, "Like I said, we do have to do these public hearings," the deputy director of the National Economic Council said during a Friday press briefing. "There has to be a certain amount of preparation to do the public hearings. You have to intake the comments that you get from the public, and then you have to decide whether to change your proposal accordingly before you do the next public hearing." Quote, "It's going to be months. I think, as I said, even the typical rulemaking process typically takes months. We are aiming to do it as quickly as possible, and so we will give you more updates as we hit each milestone in that process." So naturally, I heard this or I read this and I said, wait, is that accurate? Is that true that like you have to jump through these hoops? And, you know, I Googled it and here's the reaction. Public comment. Federal law requires government agencies to allow at least 30 days after publication for the public to submit written data, views, or arguments regarding a proposed rule. In some cases, the statute authorizing a rule requires a longer comment period. Okay. So it's very possible that the reason why he's doing this and why it's going to quote unquote take longer is because he wants to make sure you dot every I and cross every T legally so that the Supreme Court doesn't have an easy way to strike down this next attempt to reduce student loan debt. That's certainly possible. But I think a fair criticism is that Biden's going to continue to allow the interest on the debt to accrue in the meantime. And like some people are going to start paying it back. And so an argument that people like Ro Khanna have been making is, dude, just continue to pause it until we get to a point where it is wiped out. Don't have this weird interim period where people are stuck in no man's land and they have to start paying it back. Now, by the way, I also think Biden is familiar with the polling on this. He had about a 60% approval rating with young people when he first struck down the student loan debt. And then as time has gone by and now the right has chipped away at these efforts, his approval rating among young people dropped to about 30%. I mean, it got cut in half because, the right is blocking him from doing things that help young people. And, people want to see a fight. Now, to be fair, honestly, I got to keep it real. He surprised me when he appealed the cases. When he lost some lower cases, he appealed them because he wanted to uphold the student loan debt relief. And now he's shocking me by invoking the Higher Education Act. I didn't think he would do this. And I'm very, very happy that he's doing this. Now, having said that, look, this was my first introduction to the Higher Education Act. I'm going to play it for you right here. And this is by More Perfect Union. They're a great outlet, by the way. They do great reporting on labor issues. And, there was no comment in this segment about, a new rule requiring X amount of time to do public comment, etc. So let me just play for you what they said in this segment.
I'm going to talk about one simple question. Is it legal for President Biden to cancel student debt? The answer is yes. He can do it today without any other action by Congress. Let me explain why. Imagine you lend me $20. It's your $20. You can ask me to pay it back in full, in half, or not at all. Student debt cancellation works the same way. When someone takes out a federal student loan, they're borrowing money from the government, and the Constitution gives Congress the authority to control property of the government, such as debts owed to it. When Congress gave the Secretary of Education the authority to make or back student loans, it also gave the Secretary the broad and unrestricted power to cancel or write down that debt. This power was established under the Higher Education Act in 1965. That law gives the Secretary of Education the authority to compromise, waive, or release any right, title, claim, lien, or demand, however acquired. The Secretary also has the authority not simply to compromise debt, but to modify a student loan to zero. Secretary Betsy DeVos actually used this authority to cancel out a limited amount of student debt. Now, it's important to understand the purpose of the Higher Education Act. It was to make the benefits of higher education widely available, especially to those who otherwise couldn't afford it. Nobody else but the federal government was willing to lend to people with no credit history, no means, and only the chance at a bright future. But we decided to do it because education is so important to us as individuals and as a country. But the intent was not what we're seeing now: worsening the racial wealth gap, driving up costs, reducing affordability and access, and triggering a repayment crisis. The nation today has a $1.7 trillion student debt burden owed to the federal government by about 43 million Americans. At the Project on Predatory Student Lending, we represent over 1 million student borrowers who were cheated by for-profit colleges. And this is an industry that aggressively targets and scams people who are looking for jobs and careers in order to get its hands on federal student loan dollars. Their priority is enrollment, not education. We see how defaulting on student debt can cause poor credit, food insecurity, homelessness, inability to pay household debt, barriers to employment, and mental and physical health issues. It holds people back in their decisions to get married and have children, or to do certain kinds of jobs that we as a country need doing. And this burden impacts the whole family, the whole community, the whole economy, not just the loan bearer. But we've also seen how debt cancellation can liberate Americans and their families. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, the government has paused federal student loan payments through September 2021. This has freed up households.
This video is obviously old, but it just gives you an outline of what the president can do through the 1965 Higher Education Act.
This pandemic to spend money and help keep our economy going. And the ability to do that falls under the same authority to modify or outright cancel debts. In these examples and others, the law is clear. President Biden has the legal authority to cancel student debt. And doing so is not an end, but a beginning of necessary change we need to invest in higher education in a different way so that millions more Americans are not cheated out of their futures and saddled with student debt that they can never repay.
So, look, there are some people who are looking at the way Biden is going about this, and they're still super skeptical that he's doing, quote unquote, everything he can. Okay, so I'm going to give you that perspective here. The Debt Collective, which is a group that's focused on getting rid of student debt, they say they're responding to one of the Pod Save America guys who said Joe Biden is doing everything humanly possible to give people student debt relief. They respond and say, this is in fact wrong. Biden is not doing everything possible. To be honest, this action is perfectly designed to be the worst case scenario. He is resuming interest and payments voluntarily. That's what I just alluded to before. And as for relief, this rulemaking process will take at a minimum several months. This rule might not be implemented until next year, and even then it could be caught up in courts. We want Biden to fight, but this isn't what it looks like. He can cancel this debt automatically now. today, but instead he's delaying. Now, let me just pause here to say, look, I don't know if you're handing the Supreme Court the easy ability to strike this down if you hop over the rulemaking process. I genuinely don't know the answer to that question. Is it going to be easier for the Supreme Court to poke holes in the legality of this move from Biden if Biden skips the rulemaking process, doesn't allow the comment period, etc.? It could be that that's Biden's mentality on this and his approach. I want to make this as airtight as possible so it doesn't get struck down. It also could be the fact that Biden is doing this basically for the political optics so that we don't really have an answer on student debt until like after the election, right? And then it's possible that if they strike it down again in a case after the election, he goes, well, what are you going to do? I did everything I possibly could. I don't know what the answer is to that. And honestly, I don't think anybody really knows. I will say he's done a good job so far to this point. But again, the biggest issue at this point in time is he's still letting the interest accrue on the debt and they're voluntarily starting repayment. I agree with Ro Khanna 100% when he says, no, continue to pause the student loans until you can actually wipe the debt slate clean. All right, the debt collective continues here. Anyone pushing this action as fighting for you or doing everything possible either doesn't understand the rulemaking process or is lying to you. But the thing I don't understand about this is when I looked it up, it said you needed 30 days or at a minimum 30 days of a comment period for the rulemaking process. So look, this is a new rule. There's no way around it. To reduce debt is a new rule. So maybe you do need the 30 days. I don't know, right? I'm not an expert on these things, but he seems very sure that you don't need it. And I don't know if that's accurate. The corrupt Supreme Court sucks. Facts. Republicans suck. Facts. But they aren't resuming your payments. Biden is. Well, the Supreme Court struck it down. If they didn't strike down the student loan debt reduction, we'd have it for sure. This alone is his mess. We would love nothing more than for Biden to fight to cancel student debt. You can trust us to tell you if/when he does that. Okay. So, look, here's what it's going to come down to, guys. Let me give my take on what I think Biden should do. Listen to Ro Khanna, stop the interest from accruing on the debt, stop repayment, pause it again, right? Then what I would say is this. After the rulemaking process, which again should be 30 days or 60 at most in theory, right? Then what you do is have the Secretary of Education, and I wouldn't even just do the means-tested debt relief. I would just wipe the entire debt slate clean and then say, that's it. It's done. It's over. Now, if there's still court cases over this after Biden does that, and it goes, all the way up to the Supreme Court, which it almost certainly will. If that happens, when it gets to the Supreme Court, either they go with the plain face reading of the law and they say, look, it's already done anyway, and the law's pretty clear, so it's constitutional, it's allowed, right? Or if they say, no, it's not, Biden and the White House should turn around and go, oh, really? Because number one, the plain face reading of the law, look at it. Number two, it's already done. The debt slate's been wiped clean. So if you want to try to put the debt back in place, okay, by all means, Supreme Court, go ahead. You try. Now, they don't know how to do the administrative work. They don't know how to push the numbers around on the computer screen or bring them back from non-existence or the abyss. So they would effectively be in a pickle where it's like, well, there's nothing we could actually do because we don't know how to bring it back. We can only tell the executive branch, hey, you guys need to bring it back. But if Biden goes, oh, hey, man, sorry about that. Look, plain face reading of the law is clear. We already did it. It's gone. There is no ability to retroactively get these numbers back. So I guess it is what it is. Because look, fundamentally, and here's the main problem, the Supreme Court is a paper tiger. They're a paper tiger. Yes, they're supposed to do checks and balances. Yes, they do judicial review. Yes, they have some authority. But the fact of the matter is this, they're overreaching time and time again. They are judicial supremacists. They are judicial tyrants. They go against the plain face reading of the law when it conflicts with their own personal political ideologies. So check their asses. Check them. So ideally what Biden does, and I don't think he's going to do this, but ideally what he would do is, soon as the comment section is up, the comment period is up, that's it. I'm going to wait. And I wouldn't even just do the 10,000 or 20,000. I would just do fully eliminate the student loan debt and then say, that's it. It's done. And even if it gets to the Supreme Court again and they strike it down again, you say, okay, you want to go ahead and try to put it back? Go ahead, try to put it back. But it's not really possible. It's already gone. It's already done. And you don't know how to do the administrative work anyway. So just leave it be, basically. And honestly, that's a move that would work. because they're not going to know how to get the debt back anyway if you just get rid of it, right? Now, the only difference between my position now and what it was before is I didn't know about this comment period. But now that I know about the comment period, I'm okay with leaving it for 30 days as long as you stop the interest from accruing on the debt and stop repayment, as long as you pause it. I'm okay with this period just so that you dot your I's and cross your T's and make it so they can't come up with some bogus argument to strike it down. And then you strike it down and it's over and it's done. Now, again, my guess as to what Biden will actually do is he'll continue to allow the interest to accrue on the debt. He'll continue to do the voluntary repayment. And basically, we won't get an answer until it goes to the Supreme Court again. And then Biden will listen to whatever the Supreme Court says. And that's sort of devastating because he's such an institutionalist that he allows other branches of government to go full authoritarian without him checking their asses or fighting their asses. He's such an institutionalist that if one of our institutions does something egregious, he's like, well, that's just the way the system works. And that's fundamentally the problem here. But look, got to keep it real. He's done more than I expected him to do on this issue by far. I didn't expect the appeals in the case, and I didn't expect him to invoke the Higher Education Act. So fundamentally, I guess my main argument is this. Let's wait and see how it unfolds, right? There's certain things to criticize, but there's a lot to give credit for. Let's just hope this ends in a positive way. If the Supreme Court is being even somewhat honest, they would have to allow it to stand on with this legal rationale. But as we all know, they're not honest, so I'm not going to hold my breath. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.